It may come as a shock to some of you, but up until now, I had never played Fallout New Vegas. Until recently. Bored beyond relief, and with an itch to scratch for a game involving any sort of open world RPG game, I started checking my Steam library only for my eyes to wander over a copy of Fallout New Vegas, acquired ages ago, but that never saw the light of day. It led me to think. I had already played Fallout 3 numerous times, and the same went for Fallout 4, but for some reason I had never given a fair try to New Vegas, and decided that perhaps it was finally time to try out the one Fallout game that everyone seemed to agree on to be the best one in the Fallout series. So, after a few minutes of downloading and a couple of hours of modding set up in order to make sure the game could run smoothly without crashing every few minutes, as I had read that the game, at least without a few essential mods, was prone to poor performance and numerous bugs and crashes, especially on newer hardware, I had everything set up, and I was ready to properly experience New Vegas for the first time. An important detail is that for the past years I had somehow managed to avoid any major spoilers from the game. I jumped into New Vegas being aware only of a few basic elements. It's a Fallout game that takes place in the Mojave, it is heavily themed around cowboys, casinos and gambling, and it featured three major factions: a man in a screen named Robert House, the NCR, and the Legion, and my task was to recover a platinum chip stolen from me as a courier from a man named Benny who had shot me and left me for dead in the desert. That was the entire extent of knowledge that I had on Fallout New Vegas. The rest, I was completely in the dark. So, how did it go, you may wonder? Well, to put it shortly, I had a blast. That's the short version of it. But if you're curious about the longer explanation, then stick around until the end of the video, as I'm going to go in depth about my first time experience in Fallout New Vegas. Let's start with the beginning. First of all, I didn't record, unfortunately, anything from my playthrough except the ending, which I will show you at the end of the video, so stay tuned if you're curious to see what ending I got for my first playthrough. So as a background footage, you will simply see me wandering around the Mojave. It took me 110 hours exactly for me to complete the game. I did end up taking my sweet time exploring probably a good portion of the map, but I'm certain that there is still plenty I've missed out. But I mostly stuck to what I felt like I wanted to do without trying to complete literally every location and quest in order to avoid burnout. And I have the feeling that, at least on this playthrough, I managed to experience the vast majority of what the game had to offer. At first, I wasn't particularly fond of the setting in which New Vegas took place in. I think that in any video game ever, deserts are perhaps my least favorite in terms of a setting. They generally tend to be dull and empty, but New Vegas did a surprisingly good job at keeping its map alive and filled with locations to explore, along with many interesting encounters on the road to spice up the travel. In fact, there seemed to be something to do around pretty much every corner, so it was an unexpectedly enjoyable environment. I did play the game in hard difficulty, hardcore mode, from start to finish, so I also got a lot out of its survival elements: hunting for animals to cook at campfires, scavenging for purified water, managing my sleep needs. All of that was definitely a fun aspect of the game that I greatly enjoyed, and the stim packs and various healing items only regenerating health over time rather than instantly, forcing me to be, at the very least, somewhat strategic in how I should approach combat, was extremely fun to me. Minus a few moments, of course, but overall, I had a really good time. I want to talk about main story. I think that New Vegas had probably the best main story of any Fallout game that I've played. Almost everything about it made perfect sense, and I felt like my choices throughout the game did end up heavily impacting both the ending and how the story progressed throughout the game, which was a great feeling. New Vegas really nailed the amount of choices you could take to shape your approach towards the various quests. Every quest I had throughout the game always seemed like it will have at the very least 2 or 3 different paths or methods I could pick in order to complete. My only gripe with the main story in New Vegas was perhaps how forced certain parts of it were, and with this I'm specifically referring maybe to the Legion. There is a part in the main questline where if you let Benny escape with the platinum chip, he is captured by the Legion and kept as a prisoner. Now, the Legion, holding both Benny and the platinum chip, bestows upon me, the courier, Kaiser's mark, allowing me to enter their camp and meet with Kaiser, where I am tasked to descend inside of Mr. House's underground facility and destroy it. When I reached that part in the main quest line, my main question was, why me? I mean, they had the platinum chip and an army of hyper-loyal soldiers sitting right above the facility, and this seemed like a pretty important task for the Legion to achieve. So why did they have to send me specifically? Why couldn't they just send the Legate or some more expendable but at the same time already confirmed to be highly loyal troop? Up to that point in the game, I had shown nothing but hostility towards the Legion. I had even thwarted a few of their plans already, and yet Kaiser just decides to entrust me with what seemingly appeared to be one of the most important tasks of all time? That part made little sense to me, especially because after I lied about the deed being done, Kaiser seemed to just take my word for it, not even bothering to send anyone to check what the deal down there was. Like, for all they knew, that place could have been stocked up with every weapon of mass destruction imaginable for the Legion to wipe out the NCR with, but I understood that it was probably just Obsidian making sure that you couldn't get locked out from joining the Legion at a later point if you really wanted to, despite perhaps making enemies of them in the early stages of the game. Speaking of the factions, I did like the various factions in New Vegas a lot. I liked how pretty much every faction except one wasn't necessarily portrayed as being totally bad or totally good. They all had their positives and negatives. The NCR was initially portrayed as the good guys, the ones that want to establish this military regime heavily reminiscent to a pre-war military institution in order to bring order. And while they weren't outright evil or merciless, it was shown more than once how their poor organization and lack of proper communication and failure at handling their own troops and the corruption within caused major losses of innocent lives that could have been prevented easily. For me, a big turning point in distrusting the NCR was during the siege at Boulder City, where I managed to negotiate with the Khans to free the NCR hostages and be allowed to walk out freely on account of the NCR promising that, only with the commander immediately going back on his word soon after, because he had received orders to attack the Khans regardless of whether the hostages were still there or not. It was an order sent by a bureaucrat, sitting behind a desk that couldn't care less about any loss of lives, so obviously it was clear that the NCR was far from perfect and had some pretty big flaws both in their chain of command and overall organization, and despite believing themselves to be above of the Legion's own cruelties, it was shown more than once that they had no hesitation in committing literal war crimes to achieve their goals, seeing most of their troops as heavily expendable numbers more than anything. The Legion, on the other hand, is immediately portrayed as ruthless, as merciless. The first encounter I had was with Vulpes in Nipton. It was a pretty strong scene where you're walking towards Nipton, expecting to find, another settlement, a place where you could maybe trade, interact with the locals, and get some quests. Instead, you are just immediately faced with this massacre. Burned bodies on the ground, crucified man and woman, still alive, nailed to electric poles, and the Legion being simply there, thinking themselves as righteous and in the right for what they just did. Sort of like sitting on this high pedestal, believing themselves to be above all and having the full right to act as both judge, jury, and executioner upon anyone they stumble upon. And this is how they are portrayed throughout the entire game, When you reach Novak, you find out that whole backstory about Boone and his wife, and when you eventually reach their main camp, you see just more cruelty. People working in slavery, Legion troopers pitting themselves against other slaves in the arena purely as a form of entertainment, and if I were to actually list every single bad thing that the Legion did, it'd take probably the rest of this video. And yet, somehow the writing still managed to give the Legion a few redeemable points. Because everything I've listed so far, you could take out just the way it is, and it'd be basically just a normal description for any group of raiders ever. But unlike regular raiders who maim and kill just for the sake of it, the Legion does it to establish order, as their territories after being conquered through bloodshed are described as becoming, well, safe. Raider groups are eradicated, trade routes become the most secure and safe that they could ever be, while the local economy begins to flourish. I mean, the Legion's economy is so good that despite everything they do, despite all of their cruelty and constant killing, most merchants in the Mojave will still accept the Legion denarius as a completely viable currency, and that just goes to show how well anchored their economy is. Jet, Psycho, and other harmful camps are straight up outlawed, and if you know anything about Jet and Psycho, you already know that no community in the Fallout universe has ever had any benefit from using those. The Legion is also a highly self-sustaining empire, while in New Vegas the NCR is shown taking over farms and having farmers work to produce food for the troops. The Legion isn't exactly seen doing that, because they know how to grow their own food, they know how to work the land and how to bring prosperity to places that they conquer. And the troops? Look, I'm going to be real. I could say it again all over that the Legion is cruel and their methods are barbaric, but man, they give results. I'm gonna be completely real. If I was told that my town was about to be invaded by an army of super mutants, I'd choose the Legion to defend me over the NCR any day. Because I know that the NCR will just hightail it out of there the moment things will start to get rough, while the Legion will fight to their last man to defend and protect what is theirs, with its soldiers that are far more highly trained and disciplined than the NCR could ever hope to have. So while the Legion is, obviously the bad guys in all of this, they still have a few redeeming points that you could potentially make you want to side with them without being a complete psychopath. Then there's the Great Khans, who are, okay, let's be honest, practically glorified raiders. They deal in camps but aren't afraid to land mercenary services, kill and maim to get what they want, and you think that, wow, these guys are truly bad. And I mean, they sort of kind of are. I mean, the Khans are objectively, bad guys, morally speaking, but they still abide to a sort of code of honor, where they don't seem to be outright hostile or aggressive towards groups of individuals who have done nothing to wrong them. I mean, you can just walk into the Great Khan's camp, and, they will be a bit passive-aggressive about it, but they won't shoot you on sight. Their leaders, and Papa Khan especially, being individuals fully capable of listening to reason. Papa Khan in itself, unlike what we see as a stereotype of raider tribes leaders, seems to put the well-being of the tribe above everything else. So, there's definitely some points to be made as to why the Khans aren't the worst faction in existence. And then, there's the Fiends. They are complete psychopaths, addicted to camps with absolutely no regard for other people's lives, and often not even their own, and yeah, the Fiends are like the only faction that I think has nothing redeemable about them. They're probably objectively the evilest faction, unless I missed something in my playthrough, but I can't imagine the Fiends having any sort of redeeming points to them. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of the NCR or the Legion either, so this might already narrow down the final reveal of which faction I ended up choosing for the game ending. There's a few more things that I want to talk about in this video about New Vegas before concluding it. One thing in particular that I liked is how impactful your character build felt in the game. There really wasn't a single point in the game where my skills and stats distribution felt like it didn't matter, with the exception of Charisma. I did start the game at 1 point of Charisma and left it at that for the entire remainder of the game. Yet, funnily enough, the first two skills I had maxed out were Barter and Speech. So despite being a 1 Charisma goon, I was passing out Barter and Speech checks left and right. I know that Charisma in New Vegas is mostly the follower skill, but I was never a huge fan of having followers in these type of games, especially games made by Bethesda. Their NPC AI for followers is just really bad, and for me personally, they are generally more of an annoyance to deal with. And the only times when I logged followers around in New Vegas was when I got curious about their personal quests. In fact, I'll tell you right now, in terms of companions, the only ones I ended up using were the Nightkin Lily, then Veronica Santangelo, and Rose of Sharon Cassidy. And even then, I did so reluctantly because due to the fact that I was playing in hardcore mode and followers could just permanently die, and some of them had the especially nasty habit of fighting without taking precautions and just throwing themselves into the line of fire with no regard for their life, did pretty much force me to either take them with me to low danger areas and use them as pack mules, or to adopt a stealthy, hyper long range approach with the anti-material rifle most of the time. Speaking of followers, fun fact, I did at some point after recruiting Veronica send her to the Lucky 38, and she asked me if she could get room service, which I didn't think she meant that literally, but hey, did you know that followers in the Lucky 38 can and will eat and drink your shit while staying there? Specifically stuff that you leave in containers? Well, you probably knew this already, but I sure as hell did not, and found it out the hard way when I realized that my stash of Sunset Sarsaparillas that I was quite literally hoarding in an attempt to, hoard a few hundreds of them and then drink them all at once for the Legend of the Star quest, was quite literally decimated by Victoria. So, yeah, fun times. Anyway, someone told me that in terms of followers, I did miss out by not having Raoul along with me, but don't worry, next playthrough, I'm totally going to check out Raoul and Arcade and Craig. Those are pretty much the ones that I didn't care too much about, but will definitely check out in my next playthrough. But back to the whole character build I was talking about before, I focused my special stats mostly on luck. It's a stat that I always find the most fun to focus on in any Fallout game, and New Vegas was no exception, especially considering that I did manage to get banned from every single casino. I mean, if you get yourself to 10 luck, you can just play blackjack and double down every single hand without thinking about it, and you'll still rack in more caps than you could spend. Or that's what I thought at first. Except apparently the gun runners do have some pretty good weapons at some pretty hefty price, so I did end up spending those caps really fast. Oh, and by the way, another thing that I want to mention, I love Caravan. I enjoyed Caravan so much. I swear to God, I must have spent from those 110 hours of playthrough, probably like 3 or 4 of them were spent just playing Caravan. At times, even when I had, a lot of money, I was playing Caravan just for the love of it. It's amazing. I love Caravan. Now, I'm not going to go all over my perks, but I mostly focused around perks that would help in VATS. Contrary to popular belief, I do like VATS a lot in the Fallout games. I think it's a cool mechanic, and while I can see why some people wouldn't like it, I personally think that there's just far too many perks and items and mechanics that both synergize with it and work alongside it, to the point where if you're never using VATS at any time, you're missing out on a lot of cool perks. But yeah, basically my build was ballistic weapons, no energy, no melee. The first half of the game I used just a cowboy repeater and a repeating shotgun, and then in the later part of the game, after I had enough caps to afford it, I had 4 weapons that I used at all times. An anti-material rifle with penetrating ammo and explosive ammo for, death claws and cazadors, the dinner bell as my shotgun of choice because I do like shotguns a lot, the Sleepy Time SMG, and the Little Devil as backup weapons, just in case. And as far as perks go, I made use of Grim Reaper Sprint, which by the way, it's one of my favorite perks across all Fallout games. It was definitely at its strongest in Fallout 3, and then probably seeing how strong it got, they decided to nerf it down the line. Shotgun Surgeon and Stay Back were top notch for my shotgun. Sniper, Mysterious Stranger, Misfortune, and Action Boy were definitely really nice to have in VATS, and Rapid Reloading was also such a good perk to have. And let's not forget Pack Rat. I don't think I could ever play New Vegas a second time without picking Pack Rat. I did pick it very late in the game. I was already past level 30 when I did, and I regret not picking it earlier. There were also a bunch of perks that I thought were a good idea when I did pick them, but in retrospective I should have never bothered doing so. And, I will probably never pick them again. And those are Here and Now and 3 whole ranks in Swift Learner. To my defense, I had no idea that New Vegas max level was capped at 30 to 50 with DLCs when I picked those, and I also thought that leveling up will take a lot more time than it ended up taking, but rest assured I won't make this mistake again, because believe me, when I reached level 50, I would have given anything to swap out those now useless perks for some other ones that could have been far more useful. But hey, we'll live and learn, right? Now, you probably heard me mention the DLCs and the fact that I reached level 50, so that does give away the fact that I did in fact end up with the complete edition of New Vegas. So if you're still watching the video, you must be wondering, what about the DLCs? Did I like them? So the short answer to that is yes. The longer answer is certainly, but with a few caveats. I'm not going to consider Courier's Stash and Gunrunner's Arsenal for the next part of this video, because when it comes to discussing DLCs, those two specifically are, objectively good. They just add a few more tools to make your life easier, but have no inherent additional content added with them, that they're basically pay to win in a single player game. So the discussion obviously will gravitate around Lonesome Road, Old World Blues, Honest Hearts, and Dead Money. Now, if I was to rank these 4 DLCs from most liked to least liked, I think the order will pretty much be Old World Blues, Dead Money, Honest Hearts, and in the last place, Lonesome Road. Starting with Old World Blues, I thought that was the best DLC in New Vegas. If not one of the better DLCs in any game I've played so far. Old World Blues added so much, and it was so perfect in every way possible. I enjoyed the story a lot, first of all, and yes, Dr. Mobius was definitely my favorite character from that DLC. It was just such a great character, seeing how you start this whole DLC thinking that he is this evil, stereotypical evil, mad scientist, and how he speaks in these, I am Dr. Mobius, fear me tones, and you do this whole entire quest and you arrive at the end and he's just there and he's just, this little confused little grandpa with dementia. You ask him why has he been threatening you and the think tank, and he just tells you that he was tripping hard on Psycho. I mean, that was fantastic. I love that. I love that. That was one of the greatest plot twists and reveals in anything ever. I don't have words to express how much I enjoyed that. The environment was extremely interesting to me. The soundtrack absolutely slapped. The enemies were also really cool, and I love the little apartment that you get to use as your base. Having my sink and my light switches and my toaster speak to me was a prime schizophrenic experience, and of course the K9 Cyberdog gun has to be, in terms of design, one of my favorite weapons of all time across any game. Old World Blues was a fantastic DLC, and I don't have enough words to describe just how much I enjoyed it. Dead Money was a great DLC also. The characters in Dead Money were very interesting. Dog and God, Dean Domino, Kristen Royce, Feather Elijah, and Frederick Sinclair. They were all very interesting characters with a lot of personality to them. I also did enjoy gambling at the Sierra Madre Casino and exchanging all of the tokens for pre-war money, which ended up netting me enough pre-war money for a total value of about 130,000 caps. So that's definitely a good place to earn some caps early game, which for me was just right since I did play Dead Money around level 20 or something. The only gripe I had with Dead Money was that it is obvious that what they tried to pull off didn't work as it was probably initially intended to. They did attempt to create a survival horror experience in an engine that is clearly not built for a survival horror gameplay. And while the Sierra Madre Casino was definitely fun, I didn't like too much the initial area, the villa. I found it to be a little bit confusing and labyrinthine. The enemies weren't particularly challenging, but navigating the area, especially in hardcore difficulty, which resulted in taking damage periodically, was definitely the least fun part of Dead Money, but the rest of it I enjoyed very, very much. Moving on to Honest Hearts. I didn't particularly like the DLC too much, I have to say. Personally, I think it was kinda mid. Follows Chalk was my favorite character from that DLC, but I wasn't particularly fond of Joshua Graham, unfortunately, despite him being sort of like the centerpiece of that DLC. The main questline was also not that particularly interesting, at least to me. Unlike Dead Money and Old World Blues, I didn't feel like I had too much of a direct involvement in it. Rather, I was mostly a bystander who could influence the events taking place by, suggesting people what they should do. I also found the map in itself to be rather dull and uninteresting, but I guess getting to interact with the tribes and fighting Yaoguais was kind of fun, so yeah, I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. Lonesome Road was unfortunately the one DLC out of the four that I didn't like at all. The entire questline felt incredibly railroaded. The general area is essentially just one big path where you just go forward, fight a bunch of guys with rocket launchers, blow up stuff, rinse and repeat for a few hours, and then meet up one guy named Ulysses who I had zero interest in because throughout the entire DLC he did nothing but yap 24/7 about a bunch of boring stuff that I couldn't care less. Call me a brainlet if you will, but I found the dialogue in Old World Blues and Dead Money far more interesting than the supposedly philosophical one from Lonesome Road. The only good thing about Lonesome Road was that the Divide is extremely generous in terms of loot. Like, you can make it out of there with so many weapons, so many stim packs, and so much ammo, and also at the end of it you get to add a point to one of your special traits, which is also the only reason why I will replay it in the future. But rest assured, I will skip through most of the dialogue and try to speedrun it. Lonesome Road was pretty much the most boring part of my entire New Vegas playthrough, but I guess that redirecting the nukes towards the Legion was pretty cool at least. And with this, I think I've covered mostly everything that I wanted to talk about. And now I will leave you to see what ending I got on my first playthrough of New Vegas. As always, I want to thank this channel's members for their support, and if you'd like to join them, you can do so through the join button down below. If you'd like to see more videos, don't forget to like this one and subscribe to the channel. As always, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good night, and bye bye.
And who are you to come before me? You don't bear the mark of the bear, yet you are ready for battle. Kaiser's will is made truth through me. I am a hammer against all that defy his rule. If you seek to stand against me, you shall fall as the West falls. I see you fight with words, like all beneath the flag of the bear. Let us hope your skill with weapons proves greater. So you seek quarter? Terms of surrender? Our roads into NCR are hung with the bodies of those who attempted to negotiate with us. Save your speeches. We will take Hoover Dam and move forward until our feet crush the setting sun beneath them. Hoover Dam has never seen the mass strength of the East. Only legates such as Graham, who deserve the fire Kaiser blessed him with. Now I am here, and make markers of your people as the Legion carves its way west. You speak in circles. What of the East? I am the East, and I will prove it this day. The victory here shall be swift. Our forces shall take the dam, secure it, then build a road west on the bodies of the NCR. The East will hold. Once across the Colorado, nothing to rival Hoover Dam remains. Vegas will fall. I count on no one. A plant by Vorpus. Treachery is a weapon that one should never rely on. I can only hope that the Ometas died when their treachery was exposed. To have the plant succeed only would have sullied the Legion. It does not matter. Victory shall be ours. It shall be swift, and it will be honest. Purchased with blood. Your weakness? You seek to thwart me by claiming the Legion is too strong for you? That does not mean we would not succeed. The East was a hard-fought campaign. Even now, Caesar drew too much of the Legion's blood needed there for this. Hoover Dam is but a place. I will not have it be the gravestone of the Legion, whether quickly, or as you describe, slowly, by attrition. Retreat? Retreat. I was a fool to listen to you. You know nothing of who I am. Your words have done nothing but delay the inevitable. Now, see what my hounds and my blade will bring to you. I shall make a cape of your skin, and your skull, it shall sit by my side, mute, watching as my armies march west. I shall honor your last words, and face you alone as you request. No man will say I refused your challenge. Enough.
The Warlord House thought himself beyond Caesar's reach, and now he is dead. Legatus Lanius is come. The battle for the dam will soon begin. Wretched profligate, try making some trouble. Awe.
Caesar on the cross. Been a long time since I've seen the kind of work you've laid down today. A damn long time. And the screams of those Legion bastards as they kick dirt running east like a choir of angels to my ears. Speaking of, that crazy light show over the fort? What the fuck was that? Some kind of thumb of God you called down? Amazing. Fucking amazing. Could use 100 of you. Just scatter you over the east like jacks. Give those plum fucks the what for. And, well, these boys with you? Hello there, Smiley. Guess it ain't no secret how you, I say, can you ask them to put their weapons down? Was just reaching in my coat to give you a cigar. I would sooner spit on the grave of my dead mother than let some courier walk the wasteland fuck talk to me like that. Who the hell do you think you are? Looking to cash your chips to the sound of NCR bullets, huh? I can oblige. Look, I know you're riding high right now, but let me tell you, you ain't pissing on me right now. You're pissing on the bear. You've been far enough west, I'm guessing, to know how far that claw stretches. Fuck with the bear and... You want me to make tracks out of here? Head back west? Tail between our legs? No. I came for a fight today. And if you're looking to make me budge, you better have a damn good left hook, or I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. But I wasn't expecting a fight when I came up here. And now that we're talking, I don't like the sound of things. Do you know what you're doing? Making a nation like you think you're doing ain't like chowing down on a pile of fancy lad snack cakes. Think you got the guts to carve out a frontier? Build towns, protect the roads, run supplies, train troops? Hell. Can't believe we got suckered by some road jockey. Should have watched the flank while Caesar's best was making all that noise. I know what those robots of yours can do on a bad day, and I'm not eager to toss lies at them just to make a point. But if you're taking this place, you better hope you can hold it. I'll give my superiors my opinion, but I don't think they're going to listen. So if NCR comes at you, and it will, pray you're ready. I promise you, our situation's reversed, I'd see you hang. What the hell? No, get away from me, you goddamn TV on wheels.
You did a super job wrapping things up, and I'm not just saying that because I have to. I didn't want to make a big deal about this until after we won, but, well, I found some code snippets in one of Mr. House's databanks that will let me, reprogram my personality to be a little more assertive, basically. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and it's going to take me a while, so it'll seem like I'm offline. But don't worry, everything will be okay. I've updated the Securitron's targeting parameters, so they know what to do. Vegas will be protected. So that's where I'll be, off making a few changes. And I guess I'll see you around. We accomplished a lot together. It was fun. Take care.
And so the courier who had cheated death in the cemetery outside Good Springs cheated death once again, and the Mojave wasteland was forever changed. The courier, with the aid of Yes Man, drove both the Legion and the NCR from Hoover Dam, securing New Vegas's independence from both factions. With Mr. House out of the picture, part of the Securitron army was diverted to the Strip to keep order. Any chaos on the streets was ended. Quickly. Chaos became uncertainty, then acceptance with minimal loss of life. New Vegas assumed its position as an independent power in the Mojave. Supporting the ideals of independence, the courier was recognized as the man responsible for a truly free New Vegas. He ensured Mr. House's tyranny was broken, and neither Caesar's Legion nor NCR would ever gain control over New Vegas.
Tabitha and Rhonda went east, through Caesar's land. Occasionally, tales of their exploits found their way back west, though few believed them. Eventually, the stories concerning the duo were collected and published, and proved to be quite popular with children.
Still grappling with self-doubt over his usefulness in the face of old age, Raoul was never able to find peace with himself. Eventually, he left the Mojave and assumed a new name, as he had done so many times before.
Though the wasteland became anarchic after Hoover Dam, the Boomers' display of power dissuaded fortune seekers from attempting to penetrate Nellis.
The Brotherhood used the Battle of Hoover Dam as an opportunity to retake Helios 1, and came to control the area between it and Hidden Valley. With no organized opposition, their patrols began monitoring trade along I-15 and 95, seizing any items of technology they deemed inappropriate.
Veronica put her moral sensibilities aside and supported the Brotherhood's new campaign of aggression as best she could. Yet, deep down, she understood that it meant their end would surely be soon to follow.
The Fiends attacked Camp McCarran during the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, and, despite suffering heavy losses, overran it. They continued to be a nuisance throughout Outer Vegas, but never established full control over the area.
After the Courier ensured New Vegas remained free, the followers found that independent Vegas was even more unstable and violent than before. Old Mormon Fort became excessively burdened by the influx of patients, struggling to provide even the most basic of services.
With New Vegas's independence formally declared, Goodsprings thrived. More travelers stopped by Goodsprings on their way to and from the Strip, and the locals grew prosperous from the traffic.
The slaughter of the Van Graffs and the Crimson Caravan caused no end of trouble for NCR back west. Already struggling, NCR's supply line suffered further as the two caravans withdrew support until the massacre in the east was resolved. Cass lived to see the Courier bring down 3 armies, and by her count, that was 3 more than she'd expected. She kept quiet about that, though.
During the Battle of Hoover Dam, the Great Khans quickly evacuated Red Rock Canyon and headed north and east into the plains of Wyoming. There, they reconnected with the followers of the Apocalypse and rebuilt their strength. Bolstered by ancient knowledge of governance, economics, and transportation, they carved a mighty empire out of the ruins of the Northwest.
Thanks to the Courier and Lily, a cure for the Nightkin's schizophrenia was found shortly after Dr. Henry's experiment concluded. Nightkin and other super mutants in the wasteland flocked to Jacobstown, and the town became known as a haven where a mutant could find peace.
Lily continued to take her medicine at half doses, and although she remembered her grandchildren, her mind remained muddled and confused. Eventually, she parted ways with the Courier and traveled west, seeking the remnants of her past.
Following the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, Freeside came to be known as one of the more stable areas in the region. Ironically, NCR refugees found Freeside safer than most of the rest of New Vegas, where resentment still lingers.
With the transplant of Lupa's brain, Rex gained all of the donor's experiences traveling with the Legion. These melded well with his own memories of the Legion, and his new mind quickly adjusted to the myriad memories.
Though Novak was a low-priority target for the Legion, many of Novak's citizens died in its defense. In the weeks that followed, several bright followers returned to Novak to help restore its defenses, allowing it to remain independent of NCR.
After Hoover Dam, the leaderless powder gangers at the correctional facility vanished into the wastes, leaving the prison empty. The correctional facility became another abandoned ruin in the wasteland, its carcass occasionally picked over by enterprising prospectors.
After the majority of the Vault 19 powder gangers joined the Great Khans, the weaker members scattered throughout the Mojave wasteland. Though a few managed to erase their past, most never survived the journey.
After Hoover Dam, Sheriff Myers runs Prim with his own style of frontier justice. He deals with most folks fairly, But now and then, someone winds up dead with little to no evidence against them. And so the courier's road came to an end, for now. In the new world of the Mojave Wasteland, fighting continued, blood was spilled, and many lived and died just as they had in the old world. Because war never changes.